In this video I'll show you how to make simple but sturdy steel boxes with nice crisp corners, and they only take 10 minutes to make and less than that if you make a run of them. Once you've made the simple jig, they're super easy to make. I made this one a while ago. It lives under my fly press and I keep small scraps of handy steel in there. In my last video I made a tray to hold pitch for metal chasing, and I also made a shadow box to house the finished artwork and display it. Anyway, I'm using 1.6mm or 16 gauge steel, which is perfect. It's pretty thick, but it's not too thick, so it's sturdy but not ridiculously heavy. And even though it isn't super thin, to fold it, it doesn't require any specialised equipment like a bending brake, and as you can see, that's a nice crisp corner with very little effort. To make them I'm using a metal cutting circular saw, but stick with me as there's other options. You could take a metal cutting blade like this one and put it on a regular wood cutting circular saw and it will work fine. And just to show that, I'll put the blade onto my saw and give it a go. I wouldn't do this with your best saw, even though I am doing so here, but I'm just doing it to show it can be done, and I'm only making a couple of cuts. But if you have an old saw or a cheap one that you're not too worried about, that would be the go. Anyway, this is 3mm thick steel, so it's a good test, and it's about twice the thickness that we'll be using to make the boxes. Apparently the motor housing isn't sealed on a wood saw, so I reckon if you blow all the chips out regularly it should be fine, but obviously a dedicated metal cutting saw would be the best option. It did that no worries at all, and it left a super clean cut. The first thing to do in making the box is to cut out a square or rectangle, and I normally do that like this. I just measure, mark and clamp a straight edge. It works, but I'm going to make a new jig. This is the original one, and I'm going to improve on this, and I'm going to add a feature where I can cut out the square or rectangle blank. It'll be faster and more accurate, and I'll quickly tell you about this jig. It makes a shallow groove where the sides fold up from the base. I made plans and jotted down a cut list, so I'll cut the pieces from 12mm or 1/2 inch plywood. I'm using form ply because I had a couple of pieces that were just the right size, but any plywood that's fairly flat will be fine. That's all of those pieces done, and I also cut a couple of braces from 19mm or 3/4 inch plywood. And the reason I use 3/4 inch for the braces is there's a bit more thickness to screw into. You could also use something else like pine studs. I made the top in 2 pieces to leave a gap for the saw blade to drop into. You could make the top in 1 piece and then cut that kerf in, but these metal cutting saw blades really don't like cutting wood. Next I'll make the fence, and I'm using this 40mm strip of plywood. I'll also use a couple of small pieces of 3mm plywood to raise the fence up to let the box blank slide underneath. To help line up the fence, I've cut a strip of plywood, and the width of that is the distance between the blade and the edge of the saw base, and this will also be useful later on when we use the jig to make the boxes. I'll just take a moment to give you a heads up and let you know that if you click the link in the description below, you can take advantage of the Makers Mob lowest price drop ever. This Black Friday and Cyber Monday, for a limited time, the Makers Mob presents the Authentic Craftsman series. In this limited run series, teachers like myself, Jimmy DeResta, John Peters, John Hayes, the Samurai Carpenter, Liam Hoffman and Frank Howarth will teach you the skills necessary to become an authentic craftsman. Through a curated list of woodworking projects and tutorials, the Authentic Craftsman series will teach you everything from traditional hand-cut joinery, wood turning, lathe work, furniture making, blacksmithing and even leather work. There's no question the series will have you well on your way to becoming a well-rounded authentic craftsman. So click the link in the description below to get access now and take advantage of our lowest price ever before it ends this Monday at midnight. This next piece is another fence, and it's for cutting the blank square into size, and this needs to be accurate and square to the fence that we've already put on. I'll nail it to hold it in position, and then I'll add screws afterwards. It also needs to be just forward of the 3mm plywood pad that I used to raise up the fence. I also decided to continue the fence through to the other side. It's looking good and all set to try out, so I'll cut a couple of blanks ready for making boxes. It's just a case now of making one mark and lining that up with the blade kerf in the jig. The form ply I'm using is super slippy and it may not have been the best choice, but anyway I'll have to clamp it down, and it's probably not a bad idea anyway, as it only takes a few seconds. I'll cut 2 blanks from the strip, and for no real reason I'll set a stop to keep them the same size. I can't see why you couldn't use a grinder with this jig instead of the saw. You could run the back of the guard on the grinder against the fence and it wouldn't be as accurate as this, but I think it would work. I love it, they came out perfect, and I reckon this jig as it is, just for this purpose, would be worth making, but we'll make it even better yet. I wouldn't be able to use the old jig to cut the pieces square, as the fence that cuts the side is fixed and it'd be in the way. The new jig will have a removable and adjustable fence, and I was going to make it from this 3mm plywood, and that would have been fine, but I've decided to make it from some of the 16 gauge steel. I'll drill 2 holes and cut the section between to make a slot, and I'll do that either end, and they'll be for adjusting the fence. To hold the fence down, I'll use these knobs that I salvaged from an old jig, and they'll be held with T-nuts. I'll centre the fence by eye and then mark and drill through holes, and the T-nuts will be fixed from the back. I'm nearly there, I just need to add one more thing. When I'm cutting grooves for the box sides, I have to hold the blank tight against the fence, and if you're not careful it can quite easily move. To help with that, I'll add a stop, which is just a countersink bolt, and I'll fix that with a threaded insert. For the insert to go low enough, I need to drill a slight recess first. This will let me push in 2 directions, which will be a firmer hold and easier to keep planted. That really is it, it's all finished. I just need to knock the burrs and corners off these blanks so they sit nicely up against the fence of the jig. That takes no time at all, but it was worth it. Now I'll use these old calipers to mark the depth of the box side, and I'll do that down one edge of the blank. I've decided to make the second box into more of a tray, so I'll mark that one too. Now I'll use the plywood strip that I mentioned earlier to set the adjustable fence. I'll line up the edge of the strip against the mark that I just made with the calipers and lock the fence down. It's essential that the adjustable fence is parallel to the main fence. I double checked it and I made an adjustment off camera. I'll adjust the blade height on the saw by holding the steel up to it and just adjust it by eye. I'm aiming to set it to cut at least halfway through, but obviously not all the way through or leaving it too thin. It isn't a bad idea to make a test cut first. Let's give it a go. That countersink stop worked great. It really is much easier to hold it down in place. I have the compressed air ready and I blow out all the chips before making each new cut. It only takes a couple of minutes and it's super easy to do. I should probably attach some rubber to the underside to stop it moving around, but other than that, I reckon it's awesome. Next I need to cut the corners off, and that's very easy to do too, as they're already marked out and they're already cut halfway through. I'll do the first one with the grinder and it works great as it seems to follow the shoulder on the side that I'm cutting. It takes about a minute to do the one box. My preferred way is with the bandsaw. It makes less dust, but either way works, and I reckon it would only take a couple of minutes using a hacksaw. The one that I cut with the grinder has burrs on the back, but they come off very easy with a file, and the bandsaw one was pretty clean as it was. To bend the sides, I'll just use the vise, and it really is super easy to do. I did have it a bit low in the vise on that first bend, so I lifted it up slightly. If I was to make a box that was much bigger, instead of using the vise, I'd clamp a piece of wood or steel over the side and at the edge of the workbench and lift up the blank. I check that the corners are square, and if any of the sides need bending a touch more, I make adjustments. The easiest, fastest and best way to finish the corners is to weld them. It really takes very little time, but if you don't weld, you could make small corner brackets and rivet those onto the box. A bit of grinding and they're all done. They're super strong and light enough too, and the corners are nice and crisp. I reckon they're pretty awesome and they can have many uses. If I'd have thought about it, I could have used the one box to fit the other one as a lid. I also plan on making drawers for 2 or 3 different projects coming up soon, and I may make a quick video of these small organiser drawers. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, you may enjoy this one too. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.